G'day guys, welcome back to the podcast. Excited for today. It's a celebratory episode. It marks the 5th birthday of the podcast, which for me feels like a real achievement. I started this thing back in 2020, very early in the year. I started recording in an effort to reconnect with some kind of passion or just any kind of pursuit that gave me a sense of excitement to get out of bed in the morning. I'd lost that in my life. I was so blessed to have beautiful people around me, great friendships, family. I was so blessed that despite some challenges, my health was in relative order, but I felt like I'd lost that sense of excitement and hunger that I had as a young man. I think as kids, you have hobbies and you give 100% to things and you're just so excited to go do those things you enjoy. And I think in adulthood, we step into corporate responsibility and we step into work and it becomes a little bit rigid and it's all about making a buck, and all of those things are important, right? It's a normal part of life. You've got to make money to live. But I just lost a little bit of myself in all that. I lost a sense of joy and excitement and passion. And one thing that I had always loved, if you can't tell by my lack of ability to shut up, is a conversation. I loved what conversation could do for us as people. That feeling when you sit down with someone and you start talking to them for the first time and you're finding out things about them, and that curiosity, and you're forming a friendship with someone or you're learning from someone and you're just hungry to know more. I feel that deeply as a human being, that sense of curiosity. And so I wanted to be able to do that with people on a greater level, a greater scale, and the podcast was a vehicle to do that. And so I walked into JB Hi-Fi one Saturday afternoon, dropped a bunch of cash on microphones and cameras and just what I needed to get me started. And ultimately, 5 years, 263 episodes later, I'm here. I am so blessed that this podcast has connected me with some just incredible human beings that I've had the opportunity to learn from, some of whom have become what I hope to be lifetime friends, whose weddings I've attended and who I've sat down for coffees with every week, and who have become hugely integral parts of my life. And so without the people who listen to the show, being you, without your love, your support, this certainly wouldn't be where it is. There is so much more ahead of me, and I'm so excited for this next chapter because there's some big news coming in the next few weeks that I can't share just yet. But I can't wait to, because I think it's an ode and a tip of the hat to every one of you who have been along for the ride thus far. But essentially the reason we're here today is a solo episode. It is a mix of Q&A and also insight, because I put a story out to say, hey, I'm going to celebrate 5 years. I'm going to do an episode. Would you like Q&A? Would you like insights? And it was pretty split down the middle. So today, 6 questions from 6 incredible listeners, as well as 5 insights that I've garnered over the course of the last year or so that I think would have really good practical application to anyone's life. They certainly have to mine. Just want to remind you that none of this is ever preachy, right? So I'm a 28-year-old man. If you've just started listening to this show, I'm on the cusp of my 30s. So many amazing things happening in my life, but also the same challenges that everyone has, right? We're all just trying to figure it out. And so this never comes from a place of certainty or a place of I want to preach to you and I want you to listen and I'm the guru. Certainly not the case. As Chris Williamson often says, he's made a career out of being the dumbest person in the room. That's a big statement from a very intelligent guy, but certainly I sit here and share that same sentiment that in most cases I am the person learning on the podcast as I sit down and interview a guest. And so these episodes are just me sharing some experiences, having some fun and riffing off the cuff. So we'll kick it off and finish off that very long-winded introduction with the first question. Jonah Mack, he said, my question for you, Bradley, is about balancing ambition with contentment. 1 minute I feel very appreciative of everything around me and think about how lucky I am for health, family, etc. But with that contentment brings a complacency, and I lose a bit of that flame, that hunger, that drive, that want for more from this life. Do you wrestle with the two as well? If so, how do you find the line between them? For people who have big goals, and how can they best maintain that drive and relentlessness whilst also being present and grateful for what they currently have? This, my friend, is an incredible question. you'll notice that over the course of the last year or two on the show, I've consistently asked a question of very similar nature to all of my guests. The way I usually ask it is, how do you walk the line between ambition and appreciation? Because like you, Jonah, I am relating with this very heavily because I'm a very ambitious and driven person. I'm also someone who has so much to be grateful and appreciative of that the two can often clash. Now, it's very interesting that the last guest episode of the podcast that you'll be able to see in the catalogue is with the neuroscientist Katarina Kuhn. And we talked about the neuroscience of self-knowledge, or particularly the neuroscience of human behaviour and personality. And she runs this test called the Deep Sphere examination. And in the Deep Sphere test, it is grading you on your 5 primal emotions of human behaviour. Those 5 primal emotions are rank, which is that ambition we talk of, guard, which is for the more guarded nature people, seek, which is the curiosity to learn, play, which is that a little bit hedonistic sometimes, but it's also a playful, joyful way of being, and the other is care. Now, it's very interesting that we all embody all 5 of these. We all have all these 5 primal human emotions, just some of us lean more to one side than the other. And when you go through this assessment, you answer a bunch of questions. It takes you about 10 minutes, and you're basically talking about your behaviours and your personality and how you're wired, right? So you've got to be very honest with this to get honest answers. And essentially I have quite polarising results, or at least this is what she's explained to me, that I come out as high care, high rank. And essentially, I'm actually a harmoniser driven by high care, high rank. Now, care and rank usually sit on opposite ends of the spectrum, because that care is that, care for the people around you, great sense of appreciation, great sense of, really being in the sense of putting others ahead of yourself. And rank is the polar opposite to that, in the sense that you're very driven, very A-type personality. You are very selfish in the way that you go about your endeavours. And she explained to me on a podcast where she interviewed me a couple of years ago, she said, Brad, you have to understand that you're going to have these moments in your life where you feel like your ambition and your drive is at clash with your deep care for other people and your selflessness, because there'll be times when you've got to do things to move the needle and drive your mission forward, but you'll feel like, I'm leaving people behind, or I'm not taking enough care of other people, or I'm being too selfish here. And I think that all of this to say, as human beings, these emotions that make us who we are at the neurochemical level are always at clash with our nature of how we respond to the situations around us, how we respond to the jobs that we're in, the people who come into our lives. Like, we're certainly not perfect as human beings, but we're designed in a way. She says this beautifully. She says, Brad, understand that the brain isn't designed for greater self-knowledge. It's designed for survival and procreation. And that survival instinct and procreation is this very ambitious drive in all of us to store enough food, to hunt enough food, to gather enough food in order to survive and to procreate and move the species forward. And we have this personally in all of our drives, I believe, where we're always ambitious for more, especially in a world where we can see so much of what other people have. There is always a deep sense of, am I doing enough? Am I enough as I am? And that is that ambition in all of us. It also is other things like self-sabotage and all that, but that's beside from the point. The other thing is the appreciation. Well, if you're blessed enough as I am, and it sounds like you are, Jonah, to have good people around you and good health and all of those really essential things to live a good life, then you'll feel like when you're ambitious, am I not grateful? And when you'll feel like when you're in those moments of really being grateful and appreciative, am I not just like striving for enough? Is there more for me? Am I leaving something on the table? The truth is, I think you're going to feel both of those things at any one given point. Life is often tugging you in different directions. But I love, you said there, how do you navigate the line or find the line between those things? And I talk about walking the line between ambition and appreciation. I think the truth is that the moments where my ambition has me feeling like I'm not doing enough are often the moments where I am sedentary or static. So the times where I feel like I'm not succeeding at a high enough level professionally are the times when I'm not actually doing the work. So the minute I sit behind a mic And the minute I'm interviewing a guest, or I'm doing one of these solo episodes, or I'm on stage, or doing anything of that kind to actually move the needle, I don't feel that. I feel a deep sense of appreciation and a sense of contentment because I'm in the process of doing the thing. You know, there's a great book that I'm reading at the moment called Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. He's the author, I should say, of The War of Art. And there's a chapter in that book, which I've not read yet, called Turning Pro, which he's turned into a book that felt very relevant to me. So I'm reading that book. And in Turning Pro, there's a great moment, I won't get it word for word, where he kind of distinctly breaks down the amateur and the pro. And he says the amateur has a bunch of different dreams and things that they're going to start tomorrow. Like the pro just does it, right? And so I think that those moments where you feel like you're not doing enough, there could be something said for that usually happens when you're just deep in thought. You know, I've heard this great quote that you can't think your way out of thinking. It's like you kind of can't bring yourself to contentment in moments in which you're not doing and fully appreciating the things that you have. So it's like when you're with your people and you're actively present and you're not on your phone and you're not distracting yourself, you probably just naturally feel that great sense of appreciation. It's usually when you're not with them, or you're not being present, or you're not doing the things you know you could be to greater enjoy their company and to greater embrace the opportunity that you have to be with them, that you think, am I doing enough? And so it's really interesting how I think our deepest fears of inadequacy come out of just deep contemplation as opposed to deep work. And so that's at least how I feel about it all. So, you know, how do you walk the line between both? With great difficulty. And I just make sure that one of the things I'm trying to be better at this year, which I'll talk about later in Insights, is just moving with intention. So when I'm with my fiance, when I'm with my family, when I'm with my now little puppy that we just got 2 days ago, Barney, I'm just trying to be incredibly appreciative of that opportunity and just be there and be in it. Excuse me. And when I'm in my work, I'm just trying to be in it. You know, I'm trying to really be intentful about how I move this forward and about what I do. And I think that, you know, trying to not play the game of comparison, because that is very fickle, and I think it often leads us to that feeling of not enoughness and self-sabotage. And another great book that I've been partially reading, I've actually just put it down for a little bit to read, Turning Pro, but it's called The Big Leap, written by a gentleman named Gay Hendricks, and he talks about this idea of upper limit theory and how we either consciously or unconsciously as human beings tend to set ourselves an upper limit of what we believe is possible. And that upper limit is essentially us self-sabotaging ourselves anytime that we surpass that. So if you feel like you're in a space of abundance professionally, in your relationships, in your health, financially, and you're not used to that, it's like, well, normally the needle's only moving forward on one or the other, then we tend to self-sabotage ourselves either consciously or unconsciously back to a place that we're comfortable with. And I think that in that, and relative to your question, there is kind of this bullshit narrative that you can't be ambitious and appreciative of what you have at the same time. Like, we have to remember the two are not mutually exclusive. You certainly can be like, I am so appreciative for my relationship, but I'm also not silly enough to think that we can't improve things and move forward and strive for the next steps, you know? So I think that is true to any part of your life, that you can love something and be so appreciative and hold it so dear, but still be making the effort to do more. And that's not to say that it's not enough as it is. It's just you deciding that, hey, I'm not going to settle for anything that isn't my maximum potential, that isn't the greatest, grandest vision for myself. And man, if anyone makes you feel like that is out of a place of insecurity, or, you know, you shouldn't feel that way, and man, you just need to be content and relax with what you have, I don't know about that, man. I think that if you genuinely feel within you that there's more to be achieved, and it's coming from a place of excitement and curiosity and drive, not from a place of insecurity and not enoughness, well then absolutely go for it, my friend. Because, you know, for those of you who don't know Jonah, I know Jonah not super well, but well enough to know that he's a bloody great dude. And I think that all of these feelings and this drive that he has is certainly a testament and a tip of the hat to your absolute potential. So I hope that kind of answers the question, but it's bloody tricky is the simple answer. John's journeys. What do you wish you knew when you started? By started, I'm assuming, John, that you mean started the podcast, because as I said, when I shared context around 5-year anniversary celebration and what I was proud of achieving with the podcast, I'm sure that this is where John's question has come from. And so to answer that question, I will answer it in 2 parts. The first part is I'd say I'm glad someone from 5 years ahead of me didn't give me any advice, because the truth of the matter is I was so blissfully ignorant and naive when I started the podcast that I believed this would be world-class and top charts and successful within the first year. And I was so naive about the fact that it removed any kind of resistance to start. You know, when I went to JB Hi-Fi and purchased the gear, I believed that this could be the best show in the world. When I sat down to record my first episode, I believed that this could be the best show in the world. When I released my first 3 episodes on the same night on February 12th, 2020, I believed that there was nothing holding me back from achieving top ranked podcast across Australia and the world. And that naivety encouraged me into starting. Had someone have said to me, in 5 years' time, you won't be making enough money to make a career out of this. In 5 years' time, you'll still be grinding to go to a job full time, work second jobs on, for the last 1.5 to 2 years, I've been working full time, emceeing fight nights, speaking on stage, recording the podcast, editing it all. It's been at times really exhausting trying to balance everything. And that is not me whinging or complaining. Please don't get me wrong, because it is all by choice. But I certainly didn't think 5 years in I'd still be balancing so much just to keep this alive and keep, we need money to live, right? You need to find a way to put a roof over your head, put food on the table, care for the people that you care for in your life, still have some kind of existence in which you can, I remember at the times where I wasn't making much money, I just wanted to have enough to go out to dinner with my partner and spoil her and just have some food together and not stress about the next bill that was coming in. And we're certainly not in a place where we live with abundance now, but we have a comfort because, I've got consistent work and so does she, and we've worked really hard to downscale our expenses at times in order to be able to do more of what we love. And so all of that to say, if I knew it would be this challenging still 5 years in when I was taking my first steps, maybe I wouldn't have gone and bought all the podcast equipment. Maybe I would have just put up with the things that weren't really exciting or I wasn't really passionate about at the time. And so I am, on one hand, glad I didn't know what I know now when I started. But I guess the practical answer to your question, if there were some things I would go back and afford myself, it's maybe just the knowledge that when you are so full of self-belief, which I am, but so much was at the time, I was so ambitiously full of self-belief and full of the belief that everything would just work out as I planned, that there were no bumps to be had in the road, and that everyone would just fall in love with the podcast and share it around and it'd be a global success, that I probably didn't account for how popular the podcast market is for creators and how much great stuff there is out there and how you really do have to have some intention about the way that you move. And so I'm certainly not one of those guys that encourages everyone to niche down, because the niche for this podcast has really just been my own curiosity and interest, right? And essentially an effort to understand people and their stories and their insights a little bit greater in order to live my most fulfilling life, and hopefully in the process you too. But I'd probably just understand more of the fundamental marketing principles and more of the motivating factors as to why people come and listen to these episodes. So I could have been more intentional with marketing, thumbnails, titles, clips, all of that stuff. So And that's not to say I couldn't go back and do all of that for the last 5 years of episodes, because they're still there, they're evergreen, as I'm sure many of you know, because I know you go back and listen to older episodes of the show. But certainly there is a different way in which I am moving at this point in time as I move forward as to how I was 5 years ago, and that would certainly have benefited the trajectory of the podcast. But as they say, it's a cliche, but you live and you learn, and so as long as you're applying the lessons, then pat yourself on the back, give yourself some grace. Great question, John. Eli Quinn, 35. When did you find your passion for podcasting? Well, I kind of spoke about that just a moment, Eli. I guess essentially at that point in my life, 2020, I had been a real estate agent for a couple of years. I started real estate in 2016. I was 20 at the time. I remember it was September 5th. I got a memory for those things. And at the time that I started real estate, I guess most people would question, why real estate? Well, I loved human connection and talking to people, and I liked houses. And, I had like a general interest in architecture and, features of property and what made properties beautiful and creative and different. And, I like nice homes, as most people do, right? So, like in Australia, we have such a fascination with real estate. Our media is kind of dominated by real estate and these themes of property and the property market. And so I think just as a product of being a young man growing up around all of that, I was interested in that stuff. I'd been a personal trainer beforehand and had a little fitness business doing body composition testing. And I had found that the thing that frustrated me most about the fitness industry as a PT, knowing what I knew at the time as a younger man, because I was like 16, 17 when I started PT. I went to TAFE and got my certificate 3 and 4 in fitness, which qualified me to be a group and personal trainer. Went and started working in a gym called Snap Fitness down in Wollongong, which is no longer in Wollongong, and started training a bunch of clients. And I had so many great people. It's actually a really nice time in my life to look back, because I had such a passion for fitness and training. I certainly at the time, talk about naivety, thought that one day I'd look like Sonny Bill Williams. I think there'd be a little bit extra testosterone needed for that. But certainly I was very passionate about it and passionate about people. And I think my love for and interest in humans made me really enjoy, or gave me the fortune of enjoying that portion of my life. But it was just such an inconsistent job. I hated that for the most part as a young PT with very little knowledge to offer outside of the fundamental starting principles to get somebody moving in the directions of healthier habits and a healthier life, and having some success with weight loss and a little bit of muscle gain. There was probably a cap on where I could have gone had I have not continued to professionally develop. And most of my clients at the time were kind of casuals, in the sense that I don't mean that as a disservice to them, but they were making progress and they were seeing great things in their life. And ultimately, I think the goal of any personal trainer who sees their clients face to face should be to empower their clients with enough information, education to not need them present to motivate them, and not need them to basically plan everything out for them. Essentially get to a stage where maybe you just help program so they're moving forward and they don't have to think about that. But a lot of my clients were younger people too, and so they just didn't have the disposable income every week to spend money on a personal trainer or group sessions, which is completely fair. And, I understood that. But as a product of that, when you're, I guess the first line of expenses that get cut on a lighter work week for people, I just found it was very hard to make a consistent income. And I was an ambitious 20-year-old guy who wanted to start to make some money. And so I got my real estate ticket, which took me a couple of weeks, I think, to do some courses. It's very easy to get into. It's a little bit more difficult these days. But essentially got the first job I asked for as a trainee of 2 great sales agents at a local agency. And I worked that job for a couple of years. I worked for a year in Wollongong, then I got the opportunity to go work for a higher end agency down in Melbourne, which was a huge decision, because if you know me, you know that my family is my world. So to move away from my family to another state was very hard, and it was a very challenging year of my life. My health was on a bit of a downward trajectory. I went down and worked 7 days a week in an office in what was at the time a very testing Melbourne climate through the sort of autumn, winter, spring season, and found myself socially isolated, not practicing the good health habits that had made me as healthy and as vital and as happy as I had been in my past. And ultimately just kind of fell out of love with life and was in a bit of a slump. And I certainly won't go as far as saying I was suffering any kind of depression or anything like that, but I just felt very empty and like I had lost a sense of myself in the process of that. So I moved home and went back to real estate because it's what I knew, and I thought that an environment change would change the way that I felt about many of these things. At the time, I really hung the hat of fulfillment in life on professional success. And I think this is the product of being a young man in my early 20s at the time who, you know, the Instagram hustle culture and following guys like Conor McGregor who are posting their fancy suits and their fancy houses and their nice cars, and you start to almost cement this belief that money and possessions and financial success will make you happy. Certainly it has an impact, but to a degree, as a 20-year-old man with very limited expenses and with very few responsibilities financially, there's just an abundance of income. That wasn't crazy, like I wasn't on huge money, but I just realized pretty quickly that you can only have so many suits hanging in the closet before they're just another suit that you kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable in and you prefer to be in a t-shirt. And that, you know, you drive a nice car, and I used to, for real estate, for some of the videos of my properties, I'd be given a car by like Audi or BMW or someone to drive for a bit of promotion, and then they'd promote the properties. So it was kind of a joint interest deal. And I'd drive around this really nice car. I'm not very much a car guy. I appreciate nice cars and appreciate nice machinery, but certainly I drive around these cars for a day or a couple of days, and then I'd drop them back and get in my really reliable Mazda 3. That is a beautiful car, and I felt very grateful to have, and just think I don't feel any different. And so I started to question all those beliefs around the things that would make me fundamentally feel like I was living a good life, and I realized that I didn't value those things as much as I thought I had. And in my feeling of emptiness, in my loss and downward spiral of my health, I felt like I needed something to be passionate and excited about again. I was an avid podcast listener, but more so, as I mentioned before, I had a real passion for conversation and storytelling. And I felt like conversation could just move the needle for us as human beings in the way that we could learn from other people, in the way that it allowed us to greater understand ourselves. I think that there is something so beautiful in the lost art of natural, honest conversations. And as a young man who needed to figure out what he wanted from his life, a little bit of who I was, I ultimately fell in love with just getting behind the mic and listening to new and interesting people. And so that is how the passion for podcast began. But yeah, I found myself, probably just to add to that, this is a very long-winded answer, Eli, so thank you for sticking with me and to everyone else. But I found myself in a hospital bed at 23, and I was pretty unwell, and I was kind of coming to grips with the fact that something in my life needed to change. And I was encouraged to pick up a book called The Alchemist. And in the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, he says that a person's only real obligation is to find their personal legend. And essentially that idea of personal legend is like that meaning or that purpose for their life. And at the time I was like, I don't know what that is. But there was a hunger and a drive to go out and explore for that. And when you find something that you're so passionate about and you just can't stop thinking about it, for me that was this podcast and conversations and storytelling. That feeling that it gave me is so intoxicating and so addictive that the passion has not died. In fact, it has just continued to grow and grow and grow. And, you know, it's hard to know at times where that's headed, because this is certainly not certain. I'm not certain to make money from this. I'm moving in the direction of that, and this show is growing and there's exciting things ahead. But when something makes you feel that good and you know it's good for you, well then there's just been no interest in ever really stopping, regardless of the outcome. So yeah, man, that's where the passion comes from. Gemma Speg. Gemma's a great friend of mine. You will have heard her on the show. Many years ago, I've been on her show. She hosts a podcast. She actually hosts two now. She hosts a podcast called The Psychology of Your 20s and also Mantra, I believe it is. There might be some more words to it, but she has been, might I say, uber successful. She was the 19th biggest show on Spotify across the world in 2024, and she's so great at what she does. She's a trained psychologist and applies all the principles of psychology to the challenges and problems we face in our 20s. But she's asked me a bloody big question here. What is your 12-month plan? That's a good one, Jen. Well, there are so many exciting things ahead of me for the next 12 months. I mentioned just before, we got a new dog the other day, our first little boy, our first fur child for Soph and I. His name's Barney. He's a golden cocker spaniel. He's absolutely adorable. And so for the next 12 months, I'm excited to see him grow up and get him to a place in a couple months when his joints and bones are a little bit more formed, where he can start coming for some runs with us. But probably the most exciting thing ahead of the next 12 months for me is we get married in August, which I can't wait for. We decided to go away and travel for 6 weeks. We're getting married in Europe, just in a very intimate ceremony with our family, our immediate family, and beyond excited for that. A bit of travel to take the next step in, marriage is an interesting conversation, because for some people it represents different things if they're from a more religious background. But for me personally, as someone who isn't incredibly religious, I'm just very excited to make that kind of commitment to my partner. It's a commitment that doesn't change the way we operate, because we have, from the moment we were together, operated as though we were husband and wife and shared that same commitment and same drive to our relationship. But it's just really special when you can have those kind of moments and share those experiences, not only with the person you love, but with both of your families, and to travel and have new experience together for 6 weeks around that is something I am incredibly excited for. So traveling, marriage is certainly in the next couple months of my 12-month plan. There are exciting things afoot with the podcast that will ultimately help me take this to the next level of production, consistency of really big name guests, growth, personal opportunity, all things downstream from having some success in this space that I'm very, very excited for. And ultimately, there are 5 pillars in which I look to create the foundations of my life. There is health, which for obvious reasons with my cystic fibrosis is super important. But one of those health pillars is we're training for a marathon at the moment, which we will complete on April 6th, hopefully in good time. But training really hard for that, so running 4 days a week, 4 challenging sessions on top of, excuse me, the old voice went on me there. Not a great trait for a podcast, I might say. 4 running sessions a week, 2 weight sessions a week, 1 day where I'm just walking or off and just now hanging with Barney Boy. I am looking forward to that, looking forward to just getting a little bit fitter and stronger. I think I am, one of the things that's been interesting for me in the health discussion lately is, you hear so many people when you get to 30, it's just like this idea people will express. They go, oh, wait until you get to 30, mate, it's all downhill. And I just completely reject that. I don't see any reason why at 30 and upwards to 40, 50, you can't continue to get fitter and stronger. I think that we are so small-minded as human beings, where we look at life through such a short-term lens, like, oh, how much weight can I lose in an 8-week challenge, or how much muscle can I put on in the next month? And don't get me wrong, there's certainly better goals to have than to not strive for any kind of progress at all. But I think there's a great Tony Robbins quote, we often overestimate what we can achieve in a year and underestimate what we can achieve in 10. And I think that if you apply that concept to health, like what habits and what standards can I set for myself in order to find myself in a place over the course of the next year, 5, 10, 20, to be super fruitful and healthy and to appreciate and enjoy my good health. And so I'm certainly always thinking about that to move the needle forward. What else would I mention? 12-month plan. 12-month is an interesting time because I feel like so much can change in 12 months as well. And some of the things that I can't exactly speak about right now, but some of the things that are afoot, I think could mean that life looks pretty different in 12 months. But ultimately, by 12 months' time, we'll be getting pretty close to wanting kids. It's something we're very excited about. And once we've done that little bit of travel this year and had the wedding, something we'll actively move towards. Currently living in a beautiful little part of the south coast of New South Wales and really loving it here. And we'll definitely be here for the next 8, 9, 10 months. Who knows where work takes us after that. Hopefully around a similar area because I love it here. But yeah, there's so much good happening in my life that I don't feel like there needs to be any kind of major change. Just continually shooting for progress and continually finding opportunities, as Jonah alluded to before, to be really appreciative for all the good that's in my life. And if it's much of a muchness over the next 12 months, I'll be a pretty bloody happy man. Jasmine Applefoot's question. She said, what advice would you give to your 19, 20-year-old self navigating chronic illness? That's a brilliant question. I think the biggest thing would be don't be complacent, but also give yourself some grace. And so I think that when things are going not so well, when you're challenged with chronic illness, you can be really harsh on yourself because you start to question, well, where did I get it wrong? And, why have things gone in a downward trajectory? And, why am I in a hospital bed? And these are all thoughts and feelings I had at the age of sort of 18 to 24. These continual health crises that would put me back in a hospital bed, my lungs would be bleeding, and I'd have a new dangerous infection that was going to potentially damage my lungs forever, as doctors were telling me. And you really beat yourself up about it because, there's more you could have been doing, there's more you should have been doing, you're a bit complacent with your health. But ultimately, as anyone with chronic illness knows, there are some things that you can't control, right? But I am a big believer in not focusing on that so much at all. You can acknowledge it, you can give yourself some grace, but I always go, well, what can I change? What can I control? Because stressing about anything else is a waste of my time. And so at 19, 20, I would have really encouraged myself to find the things physically that I was passionate about, like sport and fitness and training again. I was very sedentary compared to how I was in my younger years, between the ages of 18 and 24. Because as I mentioned just in my question before, is I was so professionally focused, and so I wasn't training as consistently and doing the things that could rig the odds in my favour. Now, here's how you need to think about chronic illness, or at least here's how I think about it. I can't control the challenges that CF puts upon me. There are certain things that are just completely outside of my control. Because of that, there's some challenges that I'm going to have. And some of those challenges are inevitable. Some of them can potentially be avoided or pushed further down the line. Now, what are the things that I can do, be it nutrition, fitness and training, and my way of life, and my habits, and the things that I know are going to be detrimental to me that I can move to the side and get rid of? What are those things that I can control that ultimately rig the odds in my favour? Because that's what we're all trying to do. I I watched a documentary on Netflix the other day, Brian Johnson, the tech millionaire, who is essentially trying to live forever. And I think his goal is to be the first human known to live to 200 years or something of the likes. There's been a lot of criticism for this guy because some people are saying it's unnatural, death is a part of life. The documentary is called Don't Die. Essentially sort of questioning whether we ever have to die as human beings, and he has changed his biomarkers to, as a 52-year-old man, to reflect that of a 30 or 20-year-old man, something of the kind. And it's really interesting because the first 30 minutes, even as someone who is terrified of the idea of dying, because there's so much that I love here on earth that I want to live for, even to me it felt a little bit unnatural. What is this guy trying to achieve? because his life doesn't look super exciting. There's all these things that he's doing every day, ultimately in order to progress his longevity or to increase his chances of longevity. But, what's his quality of life like? And I'm a big believer in quality is important and equally as important as quantity, right? But by the end of the documentary, they had some other scientists weigh in on this, and they were saying that for all of the criticism around Brian Johnson's approach to longevity in life, ultimately some of the things that he's doing as a human guinea pig will move the needle forward. And it made me think about, 2.5 years ago, Trikafta, the drug that has made such a dramatic impact on my life and my quality of life, wasn't around. Up until just a couple months before Trikafta come around, my lungs were bleeding super consistently. And I was finding a way to run marathons and do things, but certainly there was a looming truth and reality that cystic fibrosis was a huge challenge for me in my life. And I handled it with great positivity and with great courage and determination. But there was some things that, were obviously true, that my lungs were challenging me. There was a period of time during 2021 where nearly every second night for 6 weeks I'd cough up blood. My lungs would bleed. And so that's a challenging consistency to be faced with. And then this drug comes around that is hailed to be some kind of miracle and life-changing for so many people. And I will acknowledge it hasn't been that for everyone. But for me, it, within a space of 72 hours, had completely removed any green sticky mucus from my lungs, which was the first time that I could say I was clear of that for 13 years. I used to wake up and cough up green, thick mucus every day for 13 years of my life. And within 72 hours, the drug completely cleared all of that. This drug's job is to essentially help the defective gene that challenges people with cystic fibrosis to somewhat work. It's not a cure by any means, but it helps that gene to do its job. It becomes more efficient. And so I'm all of a sudden clear of mucus after 13 years. And because I'm clear of that mucus, there's less strain on my lungs, there's an increased function, there's less lung infections, which ultimately means there's less long-term damage to my lungs. And all of a sudden, all the scar tissue and what they call bronchiectasis that have built up over years of damage and infections aren't being irritated, breaking open and bleeding anymore. And so I have had a new lease on life, for lack of a better phrase, over the course of the last 2.5 years. And it's been a product of a drug that I never planned for, right? But ultimately, the reason I get to enjoy that so much is because I was doing everything I could once I came back to the realization that this is my responsibility at around the age of 24 to really make sure that when I got an opportunity like Trikafta, I could harness it and make the most of it. And so what advice would I give to myself? The first thing is give yourself a little bit of grace. There are some things out of your control, but don't pass the buck. Take complete ownership for your circumstances, because as I'll allude to in one of the insights later, a sense of victimhood will certainly not help you. It'll only move the needle backwards, and it will only make you feel more dread and existential dread for the life that you're living, which certainly doesn't help you. The other thing is, I just want to remind you that as someone who has chronic illness, if you do, Jasmine, or maybe you're just asking this question out of pure interest, but I know there's certainly plenty of people who listen to this show who are challenged by chronic illnesses. In the harsh truth of what you have to face and all of the pain that comes with it, there is also this little gift, and that gift is that you have such a great and deep appreciation for your life and the quality of life, and for the fact that this is finite and it's not promised, that most people do not truly understand until it's too late. And so use that to your advantage, please. Find opportunities to live your truest, most fulfilling life, because you appreciate how finite and how valuable it is. And so I would say that is why I consider myself to be blessed with bleeding lungs or blessed with cystic fibrosis, is because it's afforded me this perspective to absolutely squeeze the juice out of every beautiful relationship I have with my friends, family, my partner, all of the great things that I'm passionate about and get to enjoy, I certainly try not to waste my life because I value it so highly. The last question before we get into some insights. This question is from its_Nates10. What's something you struggled with as a kid growing up? That's a good question, Nate, because if I am being completely honest with you, for the first, I'd say like 13 years of my life, I can't ever remember having many things that I struggled with personally. Of course, cystic fibrosis, liver disease, diabetes, but those things really in the early years of my life, I took 30 tablets a day, 30 to 50 tablets a day for most of my life, but I certainly didn't feel like that was a struggle. It was just my normal, and so you become very acclimatized to your normal. But probably the thing that I felt really challenged by, which I've spoken about once or twice on the podcast before, is just this, I guess when you get to teenage years and I used to be a really cute kid, like when I was in kindergarten years, very early years up until about 12, I was a cute kid. I had spiky hair, sometimes a mohawk, I had a great smile, good dimples, clear skin, I was tall, I was athletic, I was popular, I had great friends. And then this very humbling condition of cystic acne hit me out of the bloody blue as I entered puberty. And when you enter puberty and there's so much changing in you and kind of growing into an adult and change of hormones and all of those things, and certainly I didn't struggle with any of the challenges that come with puberty outside of my skin. And there's something about cystic acne, like some people break out and they have little pimples, and that's normal. I still get all that today. One of the brutal truths of life is that you think to a certain point, you're like, oh, I can't wait till I'm old enough to not have pimples. And then you get to an age where you're old enough to have grey hair, and grey hair is popping through, and you're like, why do I still have pimples? Because it's just part of the imperfect human condition, right? Some people are more lucky than others, but certainly I still am predisposed to a few blemishes. But cystic acne is a bloody bitch of a thing, because these big like cysts and abscesses pop up on your face, and it's always in like the most recognizable spot. It's between your eyes, like a bloody sniper rifle pointing you straight down the middle. It's on your dimple, it's on your nose. It's somewhere where ultimately you can't hide it. And I used to try and hide it. I remember being 13 and I had this massive cyst in between my eyes. And you can probably see if you look really closely on camera, I've got some scars on my face from where those things have damaged my skin over the years. But I suffered, I say suffered, I was challenged by this for, I reckon a good like 6 or 7 years of my life. And I used to try and hide it and make out that like I put like a band-aid over it and say that I'd scratch myself, like fallen over or playing footy or something like that. But ultimately you get to a point where you can't hide it anymore, and it really dented my confidence and probably gave me some self-worth issues from a perspective of not feeling like I was good enough or attractive enough to be the kind of person who enticed a romantic partner, or because of that I would, as a very outgoing, confident kid, I would be the guy who's standing up in front of the class, talking, asking questions, trying to be funny, being charismatic and interesting and telling stories. And then I'd have one of these cysts break out, and for the next couple of weeks I'd kind of retreat into my shell, just into my isolated group of friends, and always felt a real sense of shame about something that I couldn't really control. It was very hormonal, but we're challenged by these things as kids, and they certainly sometimes unconsciously hang around into our older years, where we start to have these limiting beliefs about ourselves, which I'm actually going to jump into in a moment when I talk about these insights. But I'd say, mate, honestly, just that really challenged me as a kid, and probably identified these feelings of not enoughness that I eventually went on Accutane, which I'm sure many people can speak to that experience of going on that drug. And I didn't have any of the downstream challenges that I know some people do with mental health or depression off the back of a very hectic and strong drug like that. But certainly it mucks with your skin, you really dry skin, really dry lips, and it's a it's an interesting period of our life. It definitely encourages you to look inward and probably drives you to be successful in other areas too. So I'd say that, mate. Do I have any advice? I wish I didn't hide myself away. I don't think you should feel ashamed of things that you can't change. There were things like I was always self-conscious of my teeth. I've got quite big chompers and I've got a big smile, so I often can kind of get away with hiding them. But my resting bitch face has me looking a little bit Bucky Kentucky at times. So, but you learn to love your flaws, and if you're lucky enough to be as I am, happily engaged with a woman that is encouraging you or forcing you to punch way above your weight, then you eventually get over those things because someone loves you still. So the sooner you can get to a place of self-love and appreciate that no one's perfect, we all have imperfections, and all the people that actually mean something to you and are valuable in your life don't like you because of just your appearance, right? There's other things that they appreciate about you. And it's just going back to what I was talking about with the chronic illness. Control what you can control. So if you feel like maybe a little bit insecure about your skin or certain features of yourself that you can't change, it's like work on being physically in shape, train, look after yourself, educate yourself, be articulate in the way you speak. You can certainly be charismatic still while struggling with skin issues, and you can certainly be interesting and intelligent and fit and strong and capable and all of those things. So just control what you can control, I would say, my friend. And I'm not sure how old you are, Nate, but man, there are plenty of things you can be challenged with as a kid, as I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast knows. And if I had a couple pimples, it's certainly the least of the concerns, because there are some far more challenging conditions for kids to grow up in. But I think the biggest thing to remember is that, when you're a kid, like it's why parenthood is such an important job, because, it's our parents' jobs to provide these safe environments to grow up, but there's only so much they can control. They can't control the schoolyard. They can't control the way that you feel about yourself if you don't express it. So as a young fella, I wish I would have talked to my mates about what I felt about my skin, but I felt ashamed. I wish I'd, talked to my family about that stuff, and they made me feel very good about it. They also took the piss out of me at times, as family does. But certainly just, if you're in that position, or for any kids out there listening, because I know there's a few that do, speak up to your mates, have conversations. Everyone is feeling the same things at those age. Like, you all feel a sense of insecurities and not enoughness, and these challenges that as a group you can understand and navigate better together than by yourself. So as my friends at Speak and Share say, problem shared is a problem halved. I nearly butchered that. All right, I'm going to dive into some of these insights. Number one, this is very interesting, and I want to talk about this in some depth. I'm calling this the self-fulfilling prophecy of limiting beliefs. So it's very interesting. I had the thought a couple of months ago that, I've done some episodes on this podcast with guests and with my mates, Ty and Joe, about this idea of limiting beliefs. And I genuinely believe that at our fundamental core, you were born as a human with a perfect soul. Like, if you look at the soul of any kid, it's pure, it's honest. And of course, there's examples aside from that, a very small percentage of people who are psychopaths or sociopaths, where there are questions to the condition of the soul. But for 99% of the population, you have this beautiful, innately perfect soul in which wants to be expressed and heard and felt and experience the world. But your nature, be it your behavior, your choices, your actions, is imperfect. You have an imperfect nature. And because of that imperfect nature, any limiting belief that you have for yourself, you will find a way ultimately to confirm it. So I just spoke about before, if you feel that you're not attractive enough, you will essentially, because of the imperfect nature of being a human being, you will wake up one day with a pimple on your face, and you will have found a reason to confirm the limiting belief that you hold for yourself. If you believe that you are not useful, you will one day make a mistake. You will break down on the side of the road because you've got a flat tire, or there's something wrong with your car, and you, not being a mechanic or not having ever been trained in that field, won't know how to change the tire or fix the issue with your car, and you'll look to the person who sat in the passenger seat and they can't do it either, and your job is to protect them and look after them, and you naturally start to feel like, well, man, I'm useless. I've confirmed it. I've confirmed what I knew and believed all along. The truth is that, yes, we're imperfect as human beings, but one thing is said to be sure, that your limiting beliefs don't serve you. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't work on yourself, that you shouldn't be self-aware. That's not the case at all. But if you have a limiting belief that you continue to say to yourself and you continue to reiterate it, and you're not doing anything about it or changing it, you just continue to say that I'm not enough because of this, you need to abolish that shit. Right? I've felt so deeply about this for so long, that your limiting beliefs don't serve you and that you set your own limits, right? Now, I was on social media the other day and I come across this page. It was actually in the Explore page. This lady, her social tag is M on the brain. So EM, like Emily or Emma. I'm not sure what her name is, her full name, but it's M on the brain. And she's a neuroscientist, and she was talking about her studies around the idea of beliefs. And she shared what she believed to be 3 really crucial reasons to have positive beliefs over negative ones. So she shared this concept of placebo versus nocebo effect. Now, I'm sure you've heard of placebo drugs. Essentially, when you are testing the efficacy of a drug, for example, I spoke about Trikafta for cystic fibrosis before. When they're doing drug trials, they will give a control group of patients a placebo and another group the actual Trikafta drug. Because what they're trying to test is whether the changes in the human physiology on the Trikafta are more so than the people on the placebo, who are just getting usually like a sugar tablet, right? But what they found is when they actually test these drugs, they include in a bunch of different drugs the placebo results in the efficacy of the drug. Why? Because they see that the placebo effect on the neurochemistry of the brain changes the way that the brain feels. This all to say that when you believe that something is being given to you in order to positively improve your condition, there is a neurochemical change. The same, though, with the idea of the nocebo effect. When you believe that something is ultimately negative for you, or that there is some kind of negative happening in you, you experience a negative physiological effect or mental effect. Now, there's a great example of this. So there was a study done, I won't be able to quote where it was from, but I listened to a podcast that cited this study in which they tested the stress of a bunch of people over a prolonged period of time. It was something like 20 years. And in all of the people who believed that stress would kill them or it would be negative for them, they all had detrimental health effects. For all of the people who believe that stress is a normal part of human life and it was encouraging some kind of post-traumatic growth, those people had positive health effects. And that cements this even further. This lady M then goes on to talk about another 2 contrasting truths, one being inattentional blindness, the other being cognitive bias. For inattentional blindness, she gives this example, and I'd never heard of this before, but it makes so much sense. She gives this example of a thing called the gorilla test. Now, it won't work on you now because you already know what the results are going to be, but essentially it's this video where it's shown to people without explaining to them the purpose behind the test. It's just to see what their experience is. Well, I'll watch a bunch of people in black jumpers and a bunch of people in white jumpers scramble around and mumbo-jumbo move in a circle passing a basketball. Now, you have to count how many times the people in the white jumpers pass the basketball. All while this is happening over the space of 30 seconds a minute, someone in a gorilla suit walks across the front of the camera. Now, there is apparently a result that is absolutely outstanding and undeniable, that because of your lack of, because of your inattentional blindness, you've not been told to look out for the gorilla. You've been told to count how many times the people with the white jumpers pass the basketball. In your effort to focus on that, you miss the fact that a gorilla or a person dressed in a gorilla suit just walked across the screen. And this goes to speak to cognitive bias. Cognitive bias being whatever you believe to be true, you will find a bias for results and examples of that to confirm it being the case. And so if you believe that things are supposed to happen in your favor, you'll find reasons to believe that. If you believe that, your podcast is going to change people's lives, you'll find the positive comments. You'll find the positive messages of people saying, hey, this has had a profound effect on me. There are so many examples of this in life that are to be true. And this is probably why, you see great examples of things like groupthink on social media and these echo chambers of people who all tend to believe one thing, is because they're often looking for reasons to believe that thing that they already hold true. The other is she talks about the self-fulfilling prophecy of beliefs. And, I believe in this so much so that when you are outwardly looking for reasons to believe the things that you do about yourself, be that negative or positive, you'll find the reasons to ultimately prove the belief that you have. It's the same as what we're talking about with cognitive bias. But I am a big believer in the self-fulfilling prophecy of beliefs, which is you often hold a belief. That belief then influences a behavior. That behavior then leads to a result. That result then reconfirms the belief. And so if you believe that you're meant to be a professional athlete, then the behavior will be you will train like a professional athlete. And then you will likely have greater results, which then reinforce the original belief that I'm a professional athlete. Where if you believe that you're not good enough and you'll never be good enough, you'll never train like someone who is, and then you'll never enjoy or experience the results that those top tier athletes do, ultimately reinforcing the belief that you were never meant to be in the pro leagues in the first place. And so all of this to say, you have a very clear choice. And I've learnt this so many times and crossroads in my own life, that you can either believe the limiting thing or the positive, fulfilling thing. And in 100% of the cases, whether people call it blissful ignorance or whether somebody says that you're delusional, there is usually, almost always, a great case for just being optimistically full of belief, because it will move you in a direction that is ultimately positive for yourself and society. So that is one of the first things I wanted to talk about, and I thought really cool to see a neuroscientist on social media talking about something that I have felt so deep in my story and my blood and my veins for so long, and that I've harped on about 1,000,000 times on this podcast. Number 2 is this idea of stuck in the mud. Now, if you are an Australian listener, you likely will have played the game at school called Stuck in the Mud. For those of you who don't know what it is, I'm going to explain quickly. Essentially, the premise of the game is you, being the protagonist, have to run from one side of the field to the other. In the middle of the field at the start is the antagonist. Their job is to tag people who are trying to make it to the other side. Now, if you get tagged, you have to stop on the spot, and you are now what we consider stuck in the mud. Now, when you're stuck in the mud, you essentially have to move your arms around like an octopus wire, probably for the novelty of the game's sake. But the only way to get unstuck is to beg for the people around you to save you. How do they save you? Well, they tag you and they set you free. Or actually, no, they don't tag you. They crawl under your legs and set you free. And so if you get tagged in this game, and the first couple goes of chaos, right? Because there's people running everywhere and you can kind of be a little bit unlucky and bump into someone and get tagged. And then you spend the rest of your energy and your time bloody hoping that someone's going to be selfless enough to save you. You need some kid in the bloody schoolyard with a hero complex to slide under your legs so that you can set yourself free and keep playing, or one of your mates who just wants to see you still hang in the game. And this game, it can be so bloody deflating, because if nobody wants to save you, you feel helpless. The truth is that, the antagonist of the game who's tagging you is much like the adversity and the challenges you face in your life, because they're going to happen, right? And often to a degree, they're out of your control. You can only run away from your problems and your challenges for so long before they find you and they tag you. And with that then comes this sense of frustration. Well, now I'm stuck in the mud. How do I move forward and continue in the game of life? Well, the truth is that not unlike the game, I should say, you're not stuck in the mud. You're just stuck in your perception of the events of your life as they unfold. And the way to move forward is to change your perspective. to choose to not be stuck, to just take a step in the right direction. Because yes, you will have champions in your life who see you, who recognize the potential in you and want to help you open a door, take the next step, move in the direction of fulfilling your potential. But the truth of the matter is that you can't rely on other people to do that for you. You know, there is absolutely nothing positive to be found in the victim mentality. And whilst that sounds maybe uncompassionate, I hope it doesn't, because I certainly approach the challenges of life with compassion. I know there's people who have been challenged with cystic fibrosis like I have, who are going through much more difficult things than I've ever had to experience. And with that is so much difficulty to keep moving, to find a way through the other side, because you're experiencing the pain and the challenge and the breathlessness, and you know, the fact that you're currently in a hospital bed, and you know, you've got to be there under doctor supervision for the next month, and all of that's really challenging. But you have to find the strength within you to find the positive in what you're experiencing, to find the lesson, to make a decision, no matter how seemingly insignificant, to move forward. Otherwise, you'll always be stuck in the mud. And I just want to encourage people and empower people to recognize the gift of just taking action and moving forward. I spoke about it right at the start of this pod. You know, like, don't think too much about how difficult the whole journey will be. Just think about putting one foot in front of the other. If you're moving in the right direction, you have something to be really proud of. Even sometimes if you're just moving in a direction, at least you're taking action. And so, you know, there are so many examples of times in life where we feel stuck in the mud. And, you know, I was thinking about and reminiscing about how we help people move forward through the challenges of their life. And this old game and the novel idea of it all come to my mind. And I just think that the harsh truth of life is that no one's coming to save you. And ultimately, you are your own hero. You are the answer. So move forward. Take a step. Insight number 3. This right here might be one of the most refreshing and I guess one of the most insightful insights, because well, that's kind of a double, I'm just doubling up on what I'm saying, aren't I? But essentially this might be one of the most freeing truths of life, is that Instagram will have you believe that when somebody sets out to achieve something in life, the progress of it happens in a linear manner, where they set out with a goal, they identify a problem, and they go, well, here's where I want to be, and here's what the destination is, and here's where I'm going to get to. And then you see this perfect trajectory of how they've just absolutely beautifully pranced through and navigated all of the steps of the journey ahead to ultimately reach their fruitful destination. And of course, there are exceptions to the rule where that happens. But the truth is, in 99% of cases, life is not linear. It does not happen like that. Progress does not happen in a straight line. It is wishy-washy. It's left and right. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards, 3 steps forward, 1 step back. It is a staggering, ever-changing, winding road of emotions and feelings and thoughts, and just things that are going to happen that are outside of your control. And so I've written a little thing that I want to read out to you that I think is nice. So it says, life is not linear, and this is the hardest yet most liberating lesson I'm continuing to learn. Full of ups and downs, twists and turns, moments of heartbreak, love, joy, and despair, life is a condensed experience of many emotions. It's too easy to walk the path that many have paved before you in an effort to fit in, but it takes courage to go off the grid, to walk the road less travelled, and to not lose sight of yourself. This is a thing I want you to hear. The poet David J. White once said, if the path before you is clear, then it is not your path. So to say, there is no map of your life to follow, as it is happening with each breath and step that we take. Nor is there a metric in which you should measure your life by. All of life's great blessings like joy, love, fulfillment, and purpose are immeasurable. Simply put, the meaning of your life is not to measure it, but to experience it. And I think that when you detach yourself from the need for life to be linear, for it to happen in a very organized and particular set of steps, you give yourself the grace to graze yourself, bruise yourself, fall down, get back up, move forward, and learn from the step that you just took. And who knows, along the way, maybe you deviate from the path and find something that is ultimately more fruitful, or find someone who becomes a part of your journey too. I think when you're so rigid and you've just got your eyes set on one set destination, you potentially rob yourself of so much more. It's a great idea that's been shared with me before by one of my great mates, Ty, around this idea of having bifocal vision, having one eye on where you want to go and another scanning the horizon for opportunities and challenges and things that are coming up. And so, don't feel like life has to move in a linear direction. Just embrace it as it comes and ultimately make the decisions that feel right from a place of gut instinct and from a place of having learnt the lessons of your past. Insight number 4. This is something that I'm trying so hard to implement this year. The insight that you cannot rush with intention. You've heard people say before that smooth is fast. There's such a truth to that. So I can speak to a million examples in my own life, but I'll go a little bit Hollywood for you here and play out the cinematic family comedy that we've all seen a million times. It's the mum who wakes up in the morning and she presses her alarm and realizes that she's late to get the kids ready for school, and she sprints down the stairs with a baby on the hip, 3 kids at the breakfast bar. She starts to pour the cereal. She knocks the milk over. The milk's all over the floor. It's a bloody mess. She's trying to mop it up. She rushes out the door and she realizes that she's locked the keys inside the house. Or an even better example is the family who wakes up well past their alarm for their morning flight to go out for their family Christmas holiday. They rush around, stuffing everything into their suitcases, packing their bags to get their family to the airport in order to not miss the flight. And in all of the panic and the rush and the madness, they realize that they've left their youngest son, Kevin, at home. We've all watched Home Alone, right? And it's this moment of you're sitting there screaming at the TV, don't forget your son. How could you forget your son? He's still in bed, he's still asleep. The truth is that when you are rushing, you're not thinking logically. You know, I pulled up some science around this, right? So I want to read this to you. So it says, okay, so essentially what I've written here, right, is you've probably seen the recent TikTok trend that says my brain can't recognize the difference between being chased by a bear, and then it gives another example, right? So essentially what this is saying is your amygdala, your fear center, doesn't recognize that fucking fight or flight of holy shit, I'm sprinting for dear life away from a bear in the woods, or I'm rushing late to get out the door for work. And in that moment, your pure survival instinct absolutely takes over, where it's just get to where you need to go, no matter the chaos that you leave in your wake. And so when we're moving through that, our brain is in a very heightened state to do what it needs to do, but it ultimately can't be present of all the things that are unfolding and happening around it. And so, you know, further from the point that I'm trying to make here is that I feel like throughout the course of last year, I had so much going on at one given time, and every day felt like it was so packed in, and I'm trying to make the most of my mornings, and I still do all these things, but I'm trying to make the most of my mornings, go out for a run, go for a coffee, catch up with a mate, go for a swim at the beach, all before I start work at 9 o'clock. Then I'm going to work at 9. I'm trying to pack all these things in so I can get home and edit the podcast or film another episode, and then spend some time with Soph, and then get to bed and get 7.5 hours of sleep as a minimum and get up and do it all again. And it felt like I was in this constant state of rush. And I used to tell myself that I liked this chaos, that I liked the craziness of trying to fit it in and get out of the door just in time. But then I think I've become old enough to recognize that, you know, when you're rushing, you're not moving with intention. And when you're not moving with intention, you're potentially moving in the wrong direction. You know, and so I'm trying to be intent about the direction I head in. You can still move quickly from point A to point B whilst making sure to make all the necessary steps so that life itself moves forward together. And what I mean by that is all the components of your life, your relationships, your health, your career, are all moving in one direction. A positive one, ultimately a fruitful one. And so I'm trying to ultimately not rush this year. And there are days where it happens and I find myself rushing out the door. And I had this example a couple of weeks ago where I'm in a bloody rush to get out the door and I'm grabbing my keys and I'm piling all my stuff in my hands, my lunch, and then I've dropped my coffee and then I've dropped my keys and then I've dropped my keys down the side of my car and my coffee's through my bloody car. And I just laughed at myself because I'm like, this is because I'm rushing. You know, if I was taking my time, I wouldn't have spilt my coffee and dropped my key. And so that is something I'm certainly working on this year, that you can't rush with intention. The last one that I'm going to share before I finish up this podcast and let you all go is similar to that point number 4. I'm calling it the problem with productivity. So productivity is an amazing thing. I believe that when productivity was presented to us as a more modern idea and people started writing books and making podcasts about it, there was a real clean and simple message. The idea was be more effective at the things you need to do in order to free up time to do more of the things you want to do. Tim Ferriss is a great example of a pioneer of this productivity movement. Tim wrote a book called The 4-Hour Workweek. The premise being pretty simple, not to necessarily say that everyone's going to fit their work week into 4 hours, but if you can become very effective at all of the things you need to do, you are freeing up your time to do more of the things that you want to with your life. And for all of us who feel like we can't fit enough in, that life is busy enough as it is, the premise of being more effective at the essential tasks is a beautiful notion. Something really freeing and exciting about that, right? You want to hear more about it. But then Instagram takes over, and TikTok, and podcasts, and all this stuff that I'm involved in, right? Where people start to hustle culture, things like productivity, right? And you basically see these examples of, and I'm so guilty of this, just doing more for the sake of doing more. So you become very efficient at doing a lot of things, but you're not really moving the needle on any of them. I've made 100 calls. Real estate's a great example, and I'm in real estate still, back in real estate for some of you who maybe don't know, over the course of the last year. And it's a great example of this. You hear agents all the time bragging about how many calls they make, and I'm certainly not knocking anyone's work ethic here, right? And I'm not the greatest real estate agent on the planet. I'm very happy with doing a small, manageable, really intentful amount of business. Back to that thing about not rushing. I'm just trying to be intentful about handling a selective group of clients and giving them my absolute best attention. But there are some agents who are running a higher volume game, right? And they're big on prospecting is all you hear in real estate, because that's how you get your business. And you hear people bragging about how many calls they've made, and some guy's making 100 calls, and it's that guy on Instagram, I forget his name, he's hilarious, and he basically takes the piss out of all these business moguls in quotations on Instagram, and these sales trainers who are just telling you to 10x and do more of everything, right? And basically guys saying, if you don't have a 10-pack, you're basically a worthless piece of shit. There's all this bullshit on Instagram, right? All these, I guess, show ponies who are telling you how to do things. And they're like 100 calls a day. Well, they're fucking rookie numbers. You've got to get that up. 300 calls a day. It's like, I don't know about you, but who's making 300 effective connected calls a day? No one. Who's doing 4 effective, intense training sessions a day with real purpose? No one. Right? There are times in life to put your foot on the pedal and times to take it off. You look at athletes. If you cannot train, no matter how fit and strong you are, if you're training well with intention, you can't train all day. You need to recover. There needs to be some purpose behind what you do. There's a reason that athletes have an off season. There's a reason that athletes recover. There's a reason that the most successful people have found a way to be consistent long term. I heard Barry Hearn, the legendary boxing and sports promoter, father of Eddie Hearn, who built Matchroom. Barry said, I wasn't the brightest candle in the room, but I always burnt the longest. Like, there is an ode to consistency and a tip of the hat that you have to give to it, that comes from just being effective and consistent at the things you do. This idea of do more for doing more's sake doesn't move the needle. Maybe it moves the needle slightly if you haven't been doing much in the first place. But we often overcomplicate things. And so it's really interesting that I think a product of the self-help world and the podcast space and Instagram and all of these things is we get all these great ideas. And I'm not knocking that. It's awesome to sit down and hear people talk about insights and lessons and share potentially really positive things that you can implement into your day-to-day routine or the way you go about your life and your business. But the truth is you probably already know most of the answers to the problems and the questions you have. Maybe I'd encourage you to think about what you can remove from your life. Are there things that aren't necessary that it is weighing you down and making it harder to be effective? So there's a great story for this that I want to share. We actually had a sales trainer come into our office maybe like 6 months ago, right? He used to come in on a semi-regular basis. And this one day he said, does anyone here know the story of how Michelangelo carved the statue of David? And immediately he perked my interest because you can see on my left arm there, I have the statue of David tattooed. And so as not a ultimately crazy religious person, I'm not saying religious people are crazy. I mean, I'm not crazy religious myself. I have some kind of beliefs, but that is beside the point. I find the statue of David and the story behind it to be fascinating. This idea of the David being someone who overcomes this greater challenge in life. And there's a beauty to this statue, and I've seen it in the flesh in Florence in Italy. And so I had the statue tattooed on me for that symbolic reason. And I immediately perked up when he suggested that he knew the story behind how David was carved. And so basically he goes on to say that, and I've done some further research on this, so I'll add to it. So he said that there was a large piece of stone that had been left behind in the construction of this beautiful government building in Florence, right? And so they were building this building that had this large, expensive piece of marble or stone that wasn't going to be utilized. And so they were going to make something to hang on the roof, right? And Michelangelo had been tasked with creating something from this stone. And he takes it away and he carves and he carves and he creates the statue of David. And it's so beautiful and so magnificent and so big that they couldn't hang it from the ceiling of this building, but rather they had to place it in the government building. I think it's called the Piazza Florenza or something of the kind. It sounds basically like that. Actually, I've got it here, Palazzo Vecchio. And so when this statue of David is placed in this building, this lady walking past, as it's revealed, is just absolutely stopped in her tracks by the beauty of it. She starts to cry and she asks Michelangelo, how have you created something of such beauty from that stone? And his answer is so beautiful. He says, I always seen David in the statue. I just had to remove everything that wasn't him. And I think that is a great analogy for life. Like, what are the things that you can remove from your schedule, yourself, that just aren't aiding the direction of the life that you want to go? What are the things that aren't effective at all? Like, what are the limiting beliefs, like we talked about before, that are stopping you from becoming who you want to be and who you know you can be? What are the daily tasks that you do because you feel like you should and it makes you look efficient or makes you look performatively busy that don't move the needle at all? I'd argue that for so many of us, the better question is to ask, not what can I add to my life, but what do I need to take away into allow myself to be more effective in what I already have in front of me. And that is where I want to finish this off. That's been a major insight for me. I'm working so hard on that this year. I'm making some traction with it, but certainly there's progress left to be had. I want to thank you so much for not just listening to this episode, but for all of you, whether it be the day oneers who listened to the first episode of this show when it was released on February 12th, 2020, to each and every one of you who have found this over the course of the last couple of days or weeks or months or years, who have become a part of the fabric of this audience that make this show great, that allow this to move in ultimately a fruitful direction for my life and my career. Thank you so much. I feel very blessed to do this. I'm going to continue to do this, and the biggest year is ahead of us yet. Catch you later. Take care. Make sure you subscribe. Send it to your mates.